Good afternoon. Is it morning? It is morning. Sorry, good morning. Yeah. Well, as I was asked to say, this will be a panel that's both informative and humorous or entertaining. We have three panelists today that are going to speak on ceramics and celluloid, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with introductions. The panelists are Mark Shapiro, Jamie Walker, and Garth Johnson, and please welcome to the podium Mark Shapiro.
So thanks for coming out. This is a great pleasure and a real honor to be with my co-panelists who I have so much admiration for, and this has been a kind of a long project. I was seated at a dinner next to Jamie, and we just started talking about movies, and before you know it, he claims I roped him into this, so we shall see. How are pots and potters seen on screens, in popular culture, and in the broader world? This panel will look at how pots and potters have been portrayed in film, television, and advertising to get at the themes, fantasies, and memes that describe the ways potters and pots are viewed in mass culture. Though a substantial body of ceramic documentaries present a vital opportunity to look at pottery on screen, and I hope that in another year there would be a panel like this just about documentaries. I think that would be fabulous. This panel explores images and stories in American advertising culture, film, and European art house cinema. For better or worse, the blockbuster film Ghost is the starting point. Dealer critic Garth Clark has more than once quipped that Demi Moore is the most famous potter in America. Ghost is perhaps the only major Hollywood movie featuring a professional potter as its leading character, though it's clear she's able to sustain her work only because her husband worked on Wall Street. Does that sound familiar? The seduction scene between her character and Patrick Swayze's as she throws a large jar to the score of the Righteous Brothers' Unchained Melody is iconic. The sensuality of Moore's character at the wheel sets the mood and gets the action going with Swayze in a sort of hands-on clay three-way. It remains the best-known representation of pottery making on film, and almost 3 decades later, perpetuates an erotic association with the process of throwing. What potter has not at some time had someone grinningly bring up the film? Ghost was so defining that its box office success apparently even bumped up enrollment in pottery classes and workshops. Our panel offers three perspectives on pots on screen. Garth Johnson looks at the presence of pottery in popular culture and advertising, expanding on Sarah Archer's 2012 Studio Potter article and sensing the beginnings of a shift toward depictions of pottery as therapeutic and redemptive. And I do want to say that we had Sarah on our panel, but she was unable to come in the end because of scheduling problems. But she's done a lot of work on this, and we really appreciate that, and I want to recognize her for that. Jamie Walker considers pottery in the films of two influential European pioneers, Spanish surrealist Luis Buñuel, who treats pottery very differently in 2 consecutive films, and Italian Michelangelo Antonioni, whose affinity with ceramics runs throughout his oeuvre. Staying in Southern Europe, I'm going to talk about the short Italian film La Giara by the Taviani brothers, arguing that it offers an example of the pot as a leading actor and ties in with some recent theory about the agency of non-living things and the vibrancy of the handmade pot. So we're going to start out with Garth.
All right, I'm Garth Johnson. I'm curator of ceramics at the ASU Art Museum in Tempe, Arizona. Come visit me. And documenting places where ceramic pops up in popular culture is something that I've been doing for a very long time. Let's face it, there are certain stereotypes of potters that are not based in the movie Ghost. And there are certain reasons that those stereotypes are perpetuated. So I'm going to take a look at some of the ways that popular culture mirrors pottery, giving the public a view in. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly brief and extemporaneous so that I can give a little bit more time to the films. But I'm going to start out with something that I don't think has probably ever been shown at NCECA, and I dug very deep. And I was able to find this clip from 1920. And I have to say that there is an early occurrence of filmmakers from the dawn of cinema documenting craftsmen in their studio and a fascination among the public. But there's a similar fascination for the fish out of water encountering the craftsman. So there's a silent newsreel, 1920. You see a working potter. And who should pop in but Mr. and Mrs. Babe Ruth. And Babe turns from swatter to potter. Great technique there. And so clean. And we're going to see that echoed in another clip that we'll see in just a little bit. So Mark mentioned that there is kind of a landmark article. I had the good fortune to edit an issue of Studio Potter after Mary Berenger retired as editor. And one of the passion projects that I picked up was encouraging Sarah Archer, incredible writer, to write about ceramics and how it turns up in pop culture. She did an amazing job. I think you can find it on the Studio Potter website, but you can also find it in the Ceramic Reader, which you can find at the ASU Art Museum reading room just down the hall, I think in room 311. So it was a happy occurrence that this got recreated and reprinted in the Ceramics Reader. One of the occurrences of ceramics showing up in a sitcom that Sarah didn't cover is one that is one of my favorites. And I want you to check out kind of how sophisticated this treatment of pottery actually is. So this is a 1986 episode of The Cosby Show. I think many of us probably remember this exact episode. But watch for the very sophisticated, semi-sophisticated unpacking of art versus craft. So Claire Huxtable and her daughter Denise are coming back from their neighborhood pottery class that they've taken.
Hey, Mom! I figured out what that thing is.
What?
It's a used tea bag holder.
Denise, that's not funny.
I'm serious. You know when you make yourself a cup of tea, but you never know what to do with the tea bag?
Let me tell you something, little Miss Know-It-All. This piece of whatever this is that you made, all right, it's okay. Granted, it's craft. I look at that thing and I know exactly what it is. But this, my dear, is high art. It challenges you. You have to bring something of yourself to this.
Well, it's saying something to me right now.
Yeah, what?
It's saying, bring me a tea bag.
I'll get it.
Cue the chase through the house. You have to bring something of yourself to this. So the early 1970s was a potent time for the growth of pottery, and I'm going to kind of get to that a little bit later in this talk. But we're seeing a nostalgic view of it in this clip from the Wonder Years, where the mother from the Wonder Years similarly is coming back from a community college pottery class that she's taken, and she really, really, really wants everybody to notice and admire and say great things about the bowl that she just made.
Oh, Kevin, will you look at this bowl? Yeah? Do you think it's big enough for the Swedish meatballs? Sure. Oh, Wayne, you see that bowl?
Yeah,
Will you take it over to the table?
sure.
Many of us have shared this vaguely horrified
not there.
effect
There.
from family
That bowl
members
there?
when we bring home our
Yeah,
first
will you put that in
pieces.
the middle of the table? Okay. Well, I guess that's everything. Oh, Jack, couldn't you lift up that bowl?
Something about a bowl here?
What?
Notice anything different?
Changed your hair.
I changed my hair 3 weeks ago.
That's what I meant 3 weeks ago.
No, the bowl. Didn't anybody notice the new bowl? I made it. Oh, wow. How'd you make it? Well, I signed up for the ceramics course at the community college. I never would have thought of doing that, but Joyce Mitsotakis was signing up, and she said it sounded really neat. I thought, why not? So I didn't tell anyone because I didn't know if I'd be really good at it. I mean, I know it's not really good, but it's just my first one.
It's supposed to be lopsided?
Well, no, I tried to.
I think it's cool that it's lopsided. I mean, it's like more natural looking.
It really is kind of neat, you know? You put
Okay, I'll cut it off there. You can find all of these clips in a YouTube playlist that goes along with Sarah's Heart Like a Wheel article, along with the next clip that I'm going to be playing. So the potter in popular culture is often portrayed as someone who's engaged in something that is a little bit unnecessary and requires a little too much effort for what comes out. And the person's always portrayed as a little bit too sensitive and out of touch. So I give you this amazing recent classic from Tony Hale in the TV show Community.
Oh, my precious blueberries. Hello. All right, let's spin those wheels and play with some clay.
Now, there's one and only one rule in this class. I will tolerate no reenacting, whether it's ironic or sincere, of the Patrick Swayze Demi Moore pottery scene in Ghost. Ever since that movie was released in 1990, I have seen every conceivable variation of what I call ghosting. This could be guy on girl, girl on guy, the hilarious guy on guy. So since it never stopped, I had to adopt a zero ghost tolerance policy. If you so much as hum 3 notes from that Righteous Brothers song, with God as my witness, I will come at you with everything I've got. Okay? Let's have a great time.
All right, so I think that there's something that the public picks up about the tension that's inherent in pottery too, and often potters are the sensitive person who is about to snap, and that's gonna rear its head in just a minute too. This is just a fun aside. This one is fairly new to me. This is a British Telecom ad from the 80s that speaks to the cultural worth of pottery in academia.
Hello?
Anthony? Oh, congratulations on your exam results.
Grandma, I failed.
You failed? What do you mean you failed?
I mean I failed. Maths, English, physics, geography, German, woodwork, art. I failed.
You didn't pass anything?
Pottery.
Pottery? Very useful. Anthony, people will always need plates. Anything else?
And sociology.
And up.
Okay, maybe familiar to some of us in this room. So this next clip is one that after the last election got a big boost, and my hearts go out to the people at Greenwich House Pottery who helped facilitate this next one.
Gentle, Donald. Slowly, okay. That's good.
How much you want for your pot? 500, 600.
Introducing Cozone.com, the place to find computer help and buy what's right for you.
All right, watch the next one.
Pay yourself.
Cozone.com, we can help.
Okay, so you got to see sort of two strains there. You got to see the fish out of water, but there's also this other strain in pottery and pop culture where pottery is shown to be sort of beneath the person. And that's the thrust of this next clip, which may be my favorite.
We're back with breaking news about clay and a huge stoneware showdown in Seattle.
The entire pottery community is going to be watching this one.
Speaking of which, what can we look forward to as we jolly around the wheel?
Keyshawn and I take a look at some
They had their research team
poised to take over their guilds.
I'm in Philly, where their high-octane slip casting techniques have studios around the country taking notice.
And as always, we'll pick our glaze of the week.
Lucky for us, they chose football.
You can also find that one online. So the next one is building on the issue of the person who's doing pottery who is about to snap. So this is a recent commercial for a real estate service in the UK called Purple Bricks.
So he finally sold the house. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm really pleased.
Did you use purple bricks?
Why would I?
They're just online.
No, they're proper estate agents. Real people. You just don't pay commission.
No commission?
No.
Ah, commisery. The misery you feel when you spent thousands on commission but got nothing more for your money. Save yourself from commisery at purplebricks.co.uk.
Oh, Schadenfreude, Ensika. That made you so happy. I know what to load up my presentations with next time. Okay, so I want to get serious for a minute and make a point that's something that I've been observing. So we often have seen ceramics being made light of in lots of commercials, but interestingly, in the last couple of years, I've seen an uptick of pottery showing up in pharmaceutical ads. And I think that you should all be kind of heartened by this. You know, after World War II and for much of this century, pottery has been seen as a therapeutic medium, a social medium, and we are sort of living in an artisanal beard oil Brooklyn era right now. And for better or worse, pottery has become part of that. And I think through a lot of the efforts that we in this room have made, pottery is being seen as part of a holistic lifestyle. So if you know one thing about the pharmaceutical industry, they know their focus groups, they know their research, and so they're not including pottery in their advertisements by accident. It's very much by design. So I just wanted to show two clips of a recent ad for an antidepressant, antipsychotic called Latuda. This commercial is from about 1.5 years ago and is called Maya's Story.
I struggle with bipolar depression, and it's tough. It leaves me feeling sad and empty, and that makes it hard to be there for the people I love. So I talked to my doctor, and...
Okay, so you see the person who's struggling with depression, but you see them in their studio, and I would argue that there's a little bit of the leveraging of that pathos and tension that we all know is sort of lurking within pottery. So we're looking at something that is holistic, but also loaded and tense in a way. And I've taken the sound out of the last part because it's the long list of all of the side effects of this medication. But you see the woman walking into a gallery and showing a friend her finished pot. And I'm actually getting like little chills here by the way that this has been sort of used and portrayed in the pharmaceutical ad. All right, so I'm going to wind up by, so I was really going to wind up with talking about a few pharmaceutical ads and talking about this trend, and then via C-File, this next music video came across my desk just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I think that in terms of the Christmas on Walton's Mountain, touchy-feely, holistic elements of pottery, we may have already jumped the shark. So there is a hip rock band called Yacht that recently put out an advertisement that is satirizing sort of ideas of the sort of young Instagram holistic lifestyle. So I'm just going to play a couple of little clips. In the first clip, definitely notice all of the handmade pots that are being shown.
Breath, brain, beauty. We are Kibu, the one for all life mist.
All right, so you all know where this is going. It builds and builds. It's showing them out in the garden eating and all of these great like young people things going on. And then, of course, they start to throw a pot.
Guess what existence is? Bigger than a business. Easy on your toenails, but you can't escape your fingers. Fingers, 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 fingers.
So the fine line between holistic and satire. All right, so you have been great. I'm going to hand things off, and as a little bit of a transition, I'm going to show a recent promotional that actually has no actual pottery in it, but should be very relevant to everyone in this room. For anyone who stayed in this room from the last From Chef to Table.
What a great way to be handed the mic. Thanks, Garth. My name is Jamie Walker. I'm a professor of ceramics at the University of Washington School of Art History, and Design. And a pleasure to be on this panel. And it's always great when you learn lots of things along the way by collaborating with friends and colleagues, and also kind of challenge the way that you think about things. So, voila. So my little bit here is the ceramic presence in the films of Luis Buñuel and Michelangelo Antonioni. The Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel had a remarkable, prolific, and peculiar career, resulting in over 50 films, many of which were influential far beyond their relative commercial success. Buñuel's first film, Un Chien Andalou. How many of you have ever seen Un Chien Andalou? Raise your hands. Bless you. Okay, if you haven't, you should see it. Un Chien Andalou, a collaboration with Salvador Dali, was extolled and reviled as a surrealist masterpiece. Living in Paris in the late 1920s, Buñuel was a major player on the interdisciplinary surrealist team that included such luminaries as André Breton, Max Ernst, Man Ray, Merritt Oppenheim, Giorgio de Chirico, and Alberto Giacometti. Less well known in this crowd was a young artist who worked primarily with clay, Joseph Lorenz Artigas, whom Buñuel cast to play the governor in his second film, L'Âge d'Or. Artigas never wavered from his love of clay, and when he moved back to Spain, he established an influential ceramic studio. He is most well known for his collaboration with Juan Miró, which resulted in a stunning body of ceramic work created over 4 decades. Perhaps through his friendship with Artigas, Buñuel developed an affinity for ceramics and an understanding of the processes used to make it. In particular, this exposure was highlighted in 2 of Buñuel's films and reflected the wide range of interest with his use of ceramics as a driver of plot. His first film in color, Adventures of Robinson Crusoe in 1954, was a relatively accurate depiction of the novel written by Daniel Defoe in 1719. After being shipwrecked, Crusoe does his DIY best to create some semblance of a civilized life, including eating off of his very own handmade tableware. Surprisingly adept at building a kickwheel and throwing an impressive body of work, Crusoe also has the good fortune of washing up on an island that has good clay, along with the wherewithal to build his own wood-fired kiln. Let's watch a little bit of Robinson Crusoe.
I built a bower, so that I fancied now I was lord of the whole manor, and had my country house and my seacoast house too. I perfected myself in old tasks and was forced to learn new ones. In short, I learned to master everything in my island.
He's just buried his dog.
Friday, what's this?
Milk.
And this?
Bread.
No, Friday, use a fork.
Friday.
What's this?
Plate.
This Friday.
Plate.
Good Friday.
Very good.
At least for the time being. Oh, hold on.
the governor of this island, drop arms!
So the hand caught in the proverbial cookie jar. At least for the time being, Crusoe establishes a remarkable sense of domestic bliss, albeit completely un-PC in this day and age, a state re-envisioned by the Swiss artist Fabien Marty with its idyllic and remote domicile to hotel, created in the Brazilian Amazon in 2013 and featuring his own clay tableware. This depiction of ceramics to establish a sense of quaint and comforting hominess completely disappears in Buñuel's film of the following year, The Criminal Life of Archibaldo de la Cruz. Cruz, a wealthy and handsome man, is also a gentleman potter with a well-equipped studio in his house. Here he is with his, we'll call him his butler, dealing with the neighbors.
Vino también el vecino de al lado a quejarse de que le molesta el humo que sale del taller.
Lo siento, pero estoy en mi casa. Y no voy a dejar un trabajo que me gusta para evitarle a él esa molestia.
We all have that problem with the neighbors in our kiln smoke. The viewer with an affinity for ceramics will notice the prevalence of large vases throughout his well-appointed house, although it is unclear whether they are his creations or further evidence of his collecting habits. Maintaining his youthful embrace of surrealism and his adherence to irrational action and jarring juxtapositions, Buñuel creates a character engaged in one of the humblest of the arts, and one who has fantasized about murder since he was a child. What appears to be a thoroughly benign scene of Cruz continually spinning pots on his wheel is interrupted by the arrival of a detective who questions his whereabouts the previous evening before announcing that his date has been found with her throat slit.
Señor quiere verlo.
Ya sabe que no recibo visitas si no es sobre aviso.
Es que insiste en hablar con usted. Es un policía.
¿Puede querer conmigo un policía? Dígale que pase.
Perdone que lo moleste a estas horas, señor de la Cruz.
Sí, en efecto. Diga qué se le ofrece.
¿Usted tiene amistad con una señorita Patricia Terrazas?
Sí. Es decir, no. Amistad precisamente no. La conozco, sé quién es.
¿Hasta qué hora estuvo usted anoche con ella?
No sé. ¿Serían las 12:30 o la 1?
¿Y mientras estuvo usted en su compañía, ocurrió alguna cosa anormal?
No, vamos, según... Si se trata de una declaración formal, no creo que este sea el lugar. ¿Puedo saber qué es lo que ocurre con la señorita Terrazas?
Poca cosa. Apareció hoy muerta, degollada.
And in one of the most disturbing scenes in a rather shocking film, Cruz only turns on his kiln in order to immolate a mannequin who is an exact cast of his latest spurned romantic interest. That was a heavily edited clip. It is available on YouTube, and what I wondered was what the neighbor complained about that evening. With a sense of with the scene understandably viewed by most audiences with horror and disgust, Buñuel delves into the realm of the subconscious and surreal in order to challenge the viewer's assumptions about convention and reality. Michelangelo Antonioni was a unique voice in the influential post-war Italian film movement. His films were often existential social critiques presented with a singular vision of composition, color, and sound. His reputation was firmly established with a trilogy of films made during the early 1960s, and he continued to pursue his vision until his death in 2007. Everyone who has lived in or visited Italy knows the omnipresence of ceramics. Entire towns are devoted to their production, from pottery to roof tiles and everything in between, a way of life that has existed for centuries. In Antonioni's first film shot in color, Red Desert, the ubiquity of clay is apparent when one of the lead characters pronounces, "Faenza is close by. It's famous for its ceramics." Known for his striking sets and locations, Antonioni pays homage to another visionary, Antonio Gaudi, with his 1975 film, The Passenger, starring Maria Schneider and Jack Nicholson. In a search about the meaning and responsibility of identity, the pair find themselves on the roof of Gaudi's Casa Mia apartment complex in Barcelona, with its startling and fascinating sculpture garden that transforms the functional necessity of chimneys and ventilation shafts. These peculiarly inventive and plastic forms are covered with Gaudi's signature use of ceramic mosaic, providing an otherworldly stage for Antonioni's characters to wander and wonder through. Although visitors can now pay a fee to access the same rooftop, for many decades, access was limited to residents. Only The Passenger provided an intimate tour to the inaccessible.
Usted ha vista una muchacha alta così.
Rubia.
Sí,
Rubia, pelo
la
largo.
pela
Sí.
cortado.
Sí, mire, venga por aquí.
Sí.
Aquí arriba, el ascensor, quinto piso. Quinto. Sí, por aquí, que no se vea. Gracias.
Have you decided not to disappear?
No. That's why I came. I thought perhaps you could help me. This way.
¿Y tú qué te has creído? Tírame mis muebles. Estos no se tocan. No, esto no se toca. ¿Qué te has creído tú?
Pero nada.
How can I help you?
How can you help me?
Thank you.
So we're going to take a little break and hear from our sponsors.
And now a word from our sponsors.
And I want to thank Jamie for this clip.
Oh, yeah?
Ceramics.
Nice.
It's not even so much major. It's more like a life calling.
Like a Zen thing.
Yeah, you know, it's like me and the wheel, you know, and the water and the clay. You know, people really need ceramics badly.
I was in the museum like not too long ago. You know what it was filled with? Ceramics.
I'm like a poet with earth.
Right, an earth poet.
An earth poet.
Cool, man.
I want to make plates. I want to make mugs.
Yeah, man, you should make those mugs. Make those mugs, man. Do it.
You know what? I will.
Oh, dude.
Buongiorno. Grazie. Thank you. Thank you.
You can always minor in ceramics.
Yeah.
The rate.
You couldn't make it up, right? So are there any Earth poets in the audience? Right. As Range Rover brings us to Italy, let's look at Luigi Pirandello's popular 1909 story, La Giara, which was adapted for screen 3 times. Its latest and best-known version is a short contained within the Taviani brothers' 1984 feature film, Chaos, which dramatizes 5 Pirandello stories set in his native Sicily. It's a film that expresses the hard beauty of Sicily's stony landscape and the suffering and resiliences of its people. The pace is much slower than much of the material we've been looking at. La Giara is a tale of a massive olla, or olive oil jar, that Don Lolo, an avaricious landlord, commissions for his bumper olive harvest. It's a story whose leading character might be said to be the pot itself. We're introduced to the jar as we might be introduced to the hero of a Western riding into town. The pot rides into Don Lolo's courtyard where his workers are preparing the olives for pressing. This is Don Lolo in the hat.
Sentite, sembra la campana di Pasqua.
So, overnight in the courtyard, waiting to be filled with olive oil, the jar mysteriously cracks. There's no explanation for it. No human agency is involved. Neither potting defect, firing flaw, nor mischief by anyone's hand can be detected. Uncle Dima, a physically deformed, eccentric jar mender, is called. He possesses a secret miraculous glue that will make the jar as strong as new. But before Uncle Dima goes to work, Don Lolo demands that the repair be stitched with wire in addition to the magic glue. The story hinges on this transgressive dictate. It is an insult to Uncle Dima's personal honor, to his independence as a craftsman, and to the integrity of the jar itself, since this requires drilling a series of disfiguring holes in the pot. Don Lolo is the boss, but Uncle Dima is an artist, master of his unique skills. I think he's an earth poet, actually. Special knowledge and proprietary magical material. As Pirandello writes in the original story, he was being, quote, he was being denied the pleasure of doing a proper job, executed conscientiously like a work of art, and proving the virtues of his cement glue. Don Lolo bullies him into using the reinforcing wire, however, causing arduous, unnecessary labor and marring the surface of the jar with ugly stitches. This more extended clip gives a sense of the dynamic between the brutal and imperious Lolo and the sensitive and magical Dima, really a triangle or assemblage of two human actors and an object agent that precipitates the story.
No, guardate, si può sanare.
E ora non la sentirò più.
Sì che la sentirete.
Vorresti farmi credere ai miracoli.
C'è chi li fa ancora.
E quello?
Il miglior conciabrocche della Sicilia.
E che ha le mani di fata?
No, le mani no, ma un mastice che fa miracoli.
E Zedima.
So we have our second grand entrance.
Dicono di aver... Dicono che avete un mastice miracoloso. Fatemelo vedere.
This is how we know he's an earth poet.
Non lo fa vedere a nessuno, lei è geloso.
Che dite? Viene bene la mia giara? Viene bene? Eh? Il tribunale ha emesso la sentenza. Però vi avverto che se anche il vostro mastice è miracoloso, io non mi fido. Ci voglio i punti.
So Uncle Dima must work inside the massive jar to drill, hold in place, and stitch the pieces together to complete the repair. The result is predictable. Uncle Dima finds himself stuck inside the repaired pot, the hump on his shoulder preventing his exit. The furious Don Lolo is humiliated in front of his workers. He urgently needs the jar for the harvest, but it's not much use with a man trapped inside it. After galloping off to consult his lawyer, Don Lolo resolves to pay the entrapped man for his repair work and then break his prisoner free so as not to be liable for kidnapping, but only after getting Uncle Dima to agree to pay for the jar at its repaired value. Incensed by this demand, which is only the latest instance of Don Lolo's capricious despotism, Uncle Dima refuses to pay, referring to rot in the jar. He calmly begins to smoke his pipe. Don Lolo storms off to bed, throwing the money in the jar for the repair into the jar and calculating that Dima will agree to his terms as hunger sets in. But when Dima's appetite grows, he simply gives the peasants his earnings, asking them to spend it all for a feast on everyone under the full moon. Uncle Dima's defiance precipitates a joyful evening as the peasants freely feast, dance, and sing. The results are predictable.
Rompo da morte, vecchio l'ardiano!
The film ends with the dancing peasants, with Uncle Dima on their shoulders and parading him out of the enclosed walls of the farmyard, while Don Lolo weeps for his beloved jar. The Oya is integral to the traditions and rural economy of Sicily, but Pirandello's jar sparks a drama that upends the traditional order. A farmhand laments early on in the tale, quote, "Who's on top commands, and who's on the bottom is doomed." In the end, the jar harbors not olive oil, nor finally Uncle Dima, but an unexpected twist of fate, the upturning of the social order, the meting out of justice, and a moment of emancipatory jubilation. The jar's uncanny self-cracking and the story of its mending stitches together a series of unlikely characters and events, and finally, it is not the jar that breaks, but Don Lolo's oppressive hold over his workers. Through the jar's uncanny intervention, justice and dignity are restored, at least for a night, to those who perform labor, but do not taste its fruits. So you got to bear with me. This next section might be a little heady, and we don't have a lot of time to go into it, but I'm going to throw it out there. As leading actor in Pirandello's story, the jar could be seen as an instance of what new materialist philosopher Jane Bennett calls vibrant matter. Quote, the curious ability of inanimate things to animate, to act, and to produce effects, dramatic and subtle. She notes the medieval legal concept of deodand, an object causing injury, would bear some responsibility and could be sold to compensate for the injured party. An idea that perhaps underpins some of Don Lolo's lawyer's convolutions. Bennett proposes that objects become things as they engender a sympathy that resonates with what she calls our human composite porousness. Things call out to us with their uncanny agency, their non-human minerality connecting to our own human thingness. Bennett cites Russian mineralogist Vladimir Verdansky's notion that inorganic things and living beings share similar forms of mineralization, that human beings are composed both of living and non-living elements. For example, our bones are calcium, as you might find in a rock. She sees expressions of this idea across other Western philosophical traditions, from Spinoza's idea of conatas, where a falling stone might hit another stone and both trajectories would be altered. The power present in all bodies, whether living or not, to Adorno's concept of incalculable non-identity, the elusive gap between a thing and any representation of it or concept of it, and to Bruno Latour's concept of actant, a thing that implies no special motivation of human individual actors nor humans in general. And the example that she offers is the North American blackout of 2003, which you really can't blame on any one locus. And she says, for example, that the grid is better understood as a volatile mix of coal, sweat, electromagnetic fields, computer programs, electron streams, profit motives, heat, lifestyles, nuclear fuel, plastic, fantasies of mastery, static legislation, etc. And I think the pot is a really good example of that, right? It's a sort of a part of a composition between these two men, and it's a kind of connective thing, and you can't really point to any one thing as being totally the agent. None of her intellectual predecessors conceive of things, as Jane puts it, as passive objects or stable entities. They allude instead to vibrant materials. Bennett takes as an epigraph to her book Henry David Thoreau's journal line, "Go not to the object, let it come to you." Bennett's thesis that there is an inherent liveliness in things resonates with my own experience as a collector and user of handmade pottery. The ability of pots to animate and exert emotion feels familiar. Pots call out, exerting a force on those who, like me, must touch and use them. How many of you have been unable to resist obtaining that certain mug, though your cabinet overflows with perfectly serviceable ones? And I think Asika is a good opportunity to experience that, isn't it? A pot hails us, calling to us with its thing power and finding its way into our lives. Pots connect to makers, to materials, to processes, and all the unseen transformational events that bring them into being. Since studio pottery's early days, this communicative and connective liveliness has been a celebrated quality of the handmade pot. As Bernard Leach put it, writing about good pots, and this is a quote, "The final word I would use, were I reduced to a single word, would be the presence of life." Pirandello's jar is indeed alive. The drama that its vital and uncanny presence precipitates is a brilliant and complex instance of non-living life force. Thanks. So we'll have time for questions. Are we on here? So we'll have time for questions, and I think there's a microphone over here if anybody has any. A microphone on the other side. We're hoping to have, we have a bit, 10 minutes for some discussion, and I don't know if someone wants to kick it off, or, I mean, I have a question for Garth, which is, it seems to me that this sort of therapeutic and ameliorative quality that you're seeing coming up in those advertisements has been with us for a long time. I'm thinking about like the Whole Earth catalog and sort of the back to the land, back to the hand kind of thing. And, sorry, I'm thinking about the back to the land, back to the hand, the Whole Earth catalog, those types of things. So I'm wondering, Garth, if you think this is a return to something or represents something different.
But pop culture is always a pendulum, and public perception is always a pendulum. So, you know, absolutely, pottery was a therapeutic medium post-World War II for GIs returning. It was always women teaching those GIs, oddly, and not getting credit. And then in the late 60s, we see the Whole Earth catalog, and pottery becomes a signifier of the holistic thing, and the pendulum swung for a while to a desire for slick objects, and we see it swinging back to something that's a little bit sort of more textured and wabi-sabi and holistic, and it'd be interesting to see where the pendulum swings next. But that's, I think, always going to be reflected in the pop culture surrounding things.
Great. Anyone have questions? So I got to spend a little bit of time with Garth Clark and Mark Del Vecchio, who came out to Tempe 2 weeks ago for our Ceramorama event and Garth's retirement tour, which everyone should check if you have an opportunity to check out a venue. But Garth reminded me of the fact that in cinema, and Mark Del Vecchio is definitely a cinephile, anytime you see the camera scanning across a home for no real apparent reason, and you see a vase, you know that that vase is doomed and is going to perish in some like next Rush Hour with Jackie Chan has one of the best sort of breaking pottery scenes ever.
Questions? We can't get it going? Come on. Linda.
Hi, I wasn't here at the very beginning, so maybe this is redundant. But thank you for the presentations. It was great to hold all that together. Could you just talk a little bit about what you were sort of hoping to deliver to us, so we can empathize and intellectualize with some of what you've said. I think Jenny Sorkin's book has been a real addition to how we think about pots in the culture that Garth mentioned therapeutically, et cetera. But there's some magic behind what you're trying to talk about. You know, you're speaking between theory and between our own experience of using the objects. But what are some of the tidbits that you shared as panelists as you built this presentation?
Yeah, I'll start. It's a great question, because I first saw these films that I showed when I was a student. And I was interested in all sorts of things, but a lot of film. And a lot of these films, the Buñuel films in particular, you know, they were really outside of my kind of comfort range and what I was used to. And seeing the ceramics in there, which I was already taking classes in ceramics, it was a point of recognition, and it brought a humanness to, especially some of that surrealist stuff was going on, which is so far out there, that it really kind of brought that to me. So it bridged these two different worlds. So I think one thing is, you know, for those of us who've been in ceramics for a long time, that's a lens that we kind of look through the world at. And so bringing up these films again, it's like the ubiquity of how, you know, even that comment that Garth was making about how a film pans a room and it's telling you a lot about the people who live in there, and if it hovers. But in every Buñuel film you'll ever see, there are pots in almost every single one of them, except for his first two movies. And they have a role there. And even as peculiar of an individual as Buñuel was, the fact that he appreciated this other sensibility, you know, that was really the grounding for them. I kind of find that fascinating. So I'm just trying, I think for me, it's really the extension through film, other kinds of art forms that also has this kind of grounding in ceramics?
So for me, it's a great question, and for me, one of the things that I've always thought, because I've tried to write some things about the field from within the field, and my feeling was always like you could write as many books and as many articles and have as many panels as you want about the wonderful things that ceramics are, but to actually sort of have an impact in a broader world, what we really need is a popular sitcom about ceramics, or a great film about Dave, which I understand I think there's, like people want stories, and for there's so much sense of our marginalization, and there's so much complaining about it, but it doesn't strike me as the way to attack that is to sort of talk more within the field, but rather to really think about how we're represented, because that's what really creates openings in terms of how people perceive us. So that was part of it, and then also for me, I've been reading this Jane Bennett stuff and this trying to understand another way to talk about. I feel like we've really failed in the critical discourse to find a language to talk about pottery. Like we're always hitching our wagons to the high status thing, which is fine art, right? But pots do different things than art, and I think it's really hard to find a way to talk about that. And when I encountered Jane Bennett's book, Vibrant Matter, and some other people like Tim Ingold and Bruno Latour, I feel like there's maybe a way in to develop a language that's more specific to the type of objects that we make that may lead to a better way to have a conversation about what we do that's specific, that doesn't always pander to the high status object and to wishing we all drove better cars.
So we've got time for one last quick question, 3 or 4 minutes from Judy.
I have to really congratulate you because this panel brings out a way of looking at our historical, our history of clay in a fresh or coming from another angle. And it's really, when you think about historically how clay pots were so valuable for storage, for eating, for everything, and that the filmmakers bring that up because it's daily life, it becomes even more poignant, and it's a fabulous way to look at history of ceramics. You've done it through Celluloid, which is, and there are many films, I think, in addition to the ones that you've shown, which show daily life. But could you also, coming from that vantage point, that wonderful perspective from another angle of looking at our history, talk about other authors, like you mentioned Thoreau, but there are many other texts. I would love to see you do a panel that would then deal with the historically written poetry.
I thought looking at the Golden Bowl of help me out. Oh man, God, how embarrassing. But I totally agree. I think literature and paint. The other place to look is painting, right? Right. Painting, literature, other. We have to stop just talking about how we see ourselves and get interested in the way other people see us. I guess that's.
And there's so many other art forms that can do it, which only reinforce the power of the clay in our lives.
Agreed.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Judy.
All right, we have to wrap things up, but thank you all very much for coming in. Have a great NC.